Have you ever wished you could fly in a hot air balloon? It does look pretty amazing to see those giant balloons silently and majestically floating by, high in the sky. Today's guest spent decades as a local pastor, but also decades flying balloons. And he's here to share some of his experiences with us today. Joining us from Taber, Alberta is Dale Lang. He was the winner of the first Canadian Hot Air Balloon Championship in 1979. And he has a new book out called On Eagle's Wings, The North Pole and 50 Years of Other Ballooning Misadventures. Dale, great to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
So you've got some great stories in this book. Tell us what sparked your interest to learn to fly a hot air balloon.
Well, it really began when I was a child. I ended up having a number of dreams when I was in the 10, 11-year-old range, where I would just walk out the back door of my parents' home and lift off the ground and float around the neighborhood. It's quite an amazing dream, and
Mhm.
I really enjoy the sensation of it. And that led me to not thinking about it that much during those next few years, but I saw a balloon fly in Calgary, 1973. And as I watched that balloon fly, I said, "Man, I really, really want to do that. I'd like to fly a balloon." So, Export A Cigarettes, as it was the company that was sponsoring this particular balloon in those days, and they had a balloon event in Riley Park, and my wife and I went down to it. We watched these balloons lift off, and we followed them out to the countryside where they landed. And if that was pretty much the point in time in which I was sold on the idea that I had to go up in a balloon, I had to try this. Really wasn't so interested in being a passenger. I really felt I wanted to be a pilot. So from there, I got going.
Tell us, what is it like to be just floating high up in the air? Was it anything like those dreams you were having?
Yes, it was. The thing about ballooning that I find most interesting is that we like to fly, most of us like to fly fairly low. So we can go across the countryside very slowly. We pick leaves off trees. We talk to the people on the ground. We can do water touch and goes, which we call splash and dashes. And you can see so much from the sky. The sensation of floating is really quite unusual. Most aircraft are moving through the air, and we're moving with the air. So it's a very different experience. And I've been doing it for over 50 years, so it is one that I guess I'd have to recommend.
So, how long does it take to learn to fly a balloon then?
The actual in Canada, the number of hours required is 16 hours of flying time. That would include 2 half-hour solo flights at the end of that training period. There are a couple of exams that need to be written and a medical that needs to be passed as well.
And once you're up in the air, how high can these balloons go and how far?
Well, basically, what limits a hot air balloon rising in altitude eventually is the loss of oxygen. But most hot air balloons would easily be able to get up to about 20,000 feet if they were trying to. You're not supposed to go above that altitude unless you have oxygen on board. 12.5 is the altitude at which you're not supposed to be above that without oxygen. Like I say, during the training program, you do have to make one ascent to 10,000 feet above sea level. But most of our flying is done at much lower levels.
So, for someone that wants to get involved in or wants to pilot or fly a hot air balloon, what are the first steps?
Well, these days it's much easier than when I started off. I ended up having to go to the States to get my training, but you would contact a licensed balloonist who is also got an instructor's rating, and then they would set up with you the timing and all the rest of it, and you would start to do some flying. There's also 10 hours of ground school required. So you go through the process of getting your 16 hours in, your ground school in. You write your exams and pass those, and then Transport Canada will issue you a hot air balloon pilot's license.
Now, can you share a bit about the story about being the first to fly a hot air balloon over the North Pole? That sounds a bit crazy.
Well, it was pretty interesting. It was back in 1977, actually. And a fellow that I'd taught to fly balloons had a little advertising balloon in Calgary. He had this scheme to go to the North Pole and do the first balloon hop over the North Pole. It's a long story. Give you the short version. We ended up taking twin otters up to Ellesmere Island, which is the most northerly island in Canada. We were camped there for a couple of days at a little fishing camp, a log cabin kind of a place. And then we took the Twin Otter out to the North Pole, the vicinity of the North Pole. That was before GPSs were involved in life. And so getting right to the North Pole was a bit more tricky. Also, we had to make sure that we had the kind of ice conditions that the Twin Otter could land on. We found a spot very close to where the actual geographical North Pole would be. We marked it with a parachute, and the parachute had arrows on it pointing in all directions, and all the directions were south. So we got the balloon out of the Twin Otter, we inflated it. Um, the fellow who had organized this whole thing was supposed to go up with his wife. And after he inflated the balloon, he told me that he'd frozen a finger on the inflating of the balloon. And so he asked me to hop in the basket and fly the balloon. So I did. It was a very short flight. We flew over the vicinity of the North Pole, then landed again. Therefore, being the first balloonist to ever fly over the actual North Pole. There's a lot about that adventure that I don't have time to tell you, but it was a pretty exciting time. And it's kind of strange to stand on the ground, in this case, the ice, and whatever direction you looked, you were looking south. Well, that just was so weird.
Right. Wow. Now, flying hot air balloons does carry some risks with it. Do you have any close calls that you can share with us?
Well, there's a lot, I suppose. I did in my very first year flying, I took up a parachutist, a fellow who was doing his thousandth jump, and he wanted to do something a little more unusual. So I took him up in the balloon. I was a very green pilot. This was near Claire's home. We went up to a little over 5,000 feet above the ground, and I started the balloon descending because when I lose his weight, it was good to be descending and not ascending.
Hmm.
So he jumped over the side, and I watched him drop and drop and drop. I thought his parachute didn't open, but finally it opened. It was about the size of my thumbnail,
Wow.
and he landed safely. Before I could get back down to the ground, the wind came up. And another long story made short, I had to land the balloon at a little bit over about close to 60 kilometers an hour, which is pretty fast for a balloon. Got down safely. The basket plowed up a lot of dirt in the field, finally stopped moving, and I got out and it was all good. Probably my worst ballooning experience ever, however, was the day I was training a student and he was soloing. We were here in Tabor. The weather looked excellent. The forecast was great. And so we went out to do this flight, and he took off, and the wind just started to pick up. And out of nowhere, out of no forecasted wind at all, we ended up with about 30 knot winds, which is about 40 miles an hour or 50 kilometers an hour. And he ended up having to land that balloon in that condition, and it was pretty rough. He wasn't hurt. He gets bruised and battered, but no broken bones. It was a challenging situation because I wasn't even in the balloon, and so I was frustrated that I couldn't be there to sort of help out. Anyhow, he survived. However, the balloon then went airborne for another 3 or 4 kilometers before we finally got to it and it came down. A little bit of damage done, but I was able to repair that and we carried on. But that was probably the most negative experience that I ever had in my ballooning career.
It does look so peaceful, but people don't realize like how dangerous it could be if the conditions are bad too. What were the early days of flying balloons like compared to today's modern balloons?
Well, that's a good question. um, the early days were a steep learning curve for most of us because the reality was that we knew some things about weather, but we didn't know as much as we thought we knew. So there was a lot of learning to be done, and hopefully you get through that without too many bumps and bruises. The equipment has been improved quite a bit in the last 50 years. So the balloons are very safe, well-built machines. They'll protect you on landing, and and they can take a lot of bumping around. But the key factor is always going to be weather, and we all know how unpredictable the weather can be sometimes. And despite all the computer models and all the forecasts that are made, they can be wrong. So you have to be careful when you go out to do a flight. You've got all your weather information. You've checked everything. You now do a visual check. You make sure that everything looks good. Most of the time, we let go a small helium balloon, a toy balloon that we let go to watch it fly through the different currents as it rises. And that can tell us both the direction and the speed that we're going to be flying in. And
Mm.
so we do is we do whatever we can to check ahead of time. And of course, even during the flight, you're watching any changes in the weather that might happen. So you can do a lot of good flying safely. You just got to be very aware of the weather. And most of that flying is done in the mornings and the evenings when the air mass is the most stable and the winds are the lightest.
Oh, that's why when I see a hot air balloon, it's usually like in the morning, early in the morning when so there's a reason behind that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the as the day progresses, what happens is we get what we call thermic air movement, where different because the surface of the earth is different colors, some areas will heat up quicker than others, and that's what creates dust devils and that sort of thing. And so once you get past in the summertime, past much past 9:30, those things kind of start to form up and the winds pick up and it's more unstable. So we avoid flying past say 10 o'clock in the morning most of the
Gotcha.
time during the summer.
Now, as I said in our opening, you spent decades as a pastor. Were there any spiritual lessons you've learned from these decades of ballooning?
Well, that could be a pretty significant topic. I guess, first of all, I would say this that life is always an adventure, not always an easy adventure. We all go through challenges and difficult times. And so the reality for me is that the ballooning is kind of a mimic or a model of that because I'm going to get into this aircraft. I know certain things about it and I've checked the weather, but I still have no guarantee of what's going to happen. I'm going to be flying. I'm not even sure of the direction sometimes, and sometimes that direction changes. It's much like life, and I feel like that's very much the spiritual lesson because as I've dedicated my life to following Jesus, I found that I really need his guidance, and I don't always know what I'm doing or exactly where I'm going. But so far, and I'm sure for the rest of my life, he gets me there safely.
Yeah, you very much are in God's hands once you're airborne. What advice do you have for anyone watching who has a desire to learn to fly balloons?
Well, I think the thing I would say is that you should probably check in with a few local balloon pilots. In my day, I had to go to the States to find a pilot who could even teach me. There was nobody in this area at that time. Um, you want to check with the pilots. You want to talk about the details and how it's going to work out. You want to make sure you're going to be working with a credible instructor. And if you hang out with some of the balloonists in the area for a little while, you'll hear and you'll know what's going on and who the people are to that you would choose to maybe give you the instruction you need to learn to fly a balloon. Um, it certainly has been a wonderful 50 years for me, and I would certainly recommend to anybody who has any inkling at all that would like to go flying. I'm reminded of a thing that a lady said on a passenger flight I did in Lethbridge a few years ago. We took off. We were flying across Lethbridge. She was there with her husband, and some of their grown children were there. And it was a beautiful, beautiful evening. And we flew out across West Lethbridge and we were heading back into the river valley just west of town. And she sort of was staring out into space. And we had one of those moments where everybody was quiet. And she just stood there and she said, I have never felt this peaceful ever before in my life. And I'd heard people talk about feeling peaceful in the balloon, but to say that was pretty kind of amazing. But it actually can be very true that when you're in a hot air balloon, you're just floating along and all your worries are gone and what you have in front of you is just this beautiful view and it's just so peaceful and calm. So that was kind of interesting.
Dale Lang is the author of On Eagle's Wings, The North Pole, and 50 Years of Other Ballooning Misadventures. Dale, thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. I appreciate being able to share with you.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.